fentanyl and its analogs and new synthetic drugs have won the war on drugs. We have made this a far more dangerous drug market decade after decade. The DEA just celebrated their 50th anniversary. And I would argue it's precisely their policies that incentivized the kind of market we have today.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Jim Budd, former senior patrol agent with the United States Border Patrol. And today I have with me I've never had him on before, but I've followed him for years on Twitter. His name is Sanho Tree, and he is a fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies and has been the director of its drug policy project since 1998. A former military and diplomatic historian, his current work encompasses the reform of both international and domestic drug policies by promoting alternatives to the failed prohibitionist model. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
That's a mouthful. That's a mouthful. So I've always been interested in this subject of legalizing drugs because even as an agent in the U.S. Border Patrol, predominantly in Campo, we only got marijuana. And I would ask the senior agents when I was young, why do we only get marijuana? Because honestly, I don't really think of that as a dangerous drug at all. I use it now that I'm not a Border Patrol agent for PTSD and nerve pain in my hands from my suicide attempt. And I always felt like, I would rather people be on marijuana than alcohol as a law enforcement officer. But yet we kept going after that and kept going after that. But the real drugs that they always say are so harmful and this and that, we never saw them coming across between the ports of entry unless we got them at the checkpoint. And then you can't tell if it's coming across, in between the ports of entry. Likely it's mostly coming through the ports of entry. But you advocate for legalization, is it of all drugs?
Of regulation and decriminalization of certain drugs, legalization of others. So it doesn't mean that we have to make them available at the local CVS for anyone who wants to pick up a heroin, have it on demand, that sort of thing. But that neither should anyone be criminalized for what they put into their body, absent harm to others. That fundamentally we have to rethink our relationship with the state, and that the idea that your body, in the privacy of your own home, if you're not causing a nuisance to anyone else, somehow belongs to the state, that they can regulate what you put into your blood, into your veins, into your mouth, into your lungs, into any orifice that bleeds over, so to speak, into sexual freedoms, reproductive rights. If you don't own your own body at the end of the day, what do you own? So I think from that civil libertarian point of view, that has to be respected, the bodily autonomy. And we're seeing this on the front lines of so many fights politically today, not just in the drug sphere. So I think it's important to assert that, but also some of these substances are too potentially harmful not to regulate, right? So the prohibition doesn't mean we control drugs. It means we've chosen not to control the drugs, not to regulate. And so that's what we've been experiencing for, many, many decades now, is an illicit market where the market incentives are such that traffickers will gravitate toward drugs that are more profitable, easier to smuggle, more compact. It's called the iron law of prohibition. I would call it a bronze law. It's not quite solid iron, but it's generally true that you get this effect. We saw this during alcohol prohibition, right? That turned a nation of beer drinkers into a nation of wine drinkers, and beer and wine drinkers into a nation of liquor drinkers. Because if you were a bootlegger during prohibition, the last thing you wanted to smuggle was beer. This big, bulky barrel on your back, you're going to get busted. If you're going to risk jail time, you might as well get the purest form of alcohol you can. And so that's kind of the dynamic that's been pushing this disastrous drug war into this dead end, this cul-de-sac, where fentanyl and its analogs and new synthetic drugs have won the war on drugs. We have made this a far more dangerous drug market decade after decade.
Mhm.
The DEA just celebrated their 50th anniversary. And I would
Mhm.
argue it's precisely their policies that incentivized the kind of market we have today. And one of my greatest fears right now is that the attempt to crack down on fentanyl and its precursor chemicals is going to lead to substitutes that are far more potent, more dangerous, easier to produce, harder to stop. And particularly with the boost given by, well, not just a boost, a revolutionary new window opened up by AI, so that artificial intelligence can sort out, can do what no human can do. They can sort out, it can sort out, tens of thousands of journal articles, identify promising compounds. They've already done this with, for instance, drug-resistant bacteria. So that's a good thing. They found new drugs that can fight off some of these drugs that are currently resistant to our known antibiotics, and identified promising new chemicals. That's a good thing. Now, if
Hmm.
you're an underground illicit chemist working for the cartels and the US has banned this or that precursor chemical, well, there are many different pathways to the same destination, so to speak. And some of those analogs of fentanyl are far more potent than the fentanyl that we have in the street today. So carfentanil has already shown up, elephant tranquilizer basically, has already shown up in our domestic drug supply. We have to stop incentivizing the market to to move in this direction, and that's
Mhm.
basically what drug warriors have done. And they they go around as a hammer, seeing every problem as a nail. Right, the only solution is to whack it down, and try to suppress it. And in so doing, they've instituted the same incentives and amplified them that have gotten us into this cul-de-sac, this fentanyl dead
I
end.
It's interesting that you explain it in that way, and that's a way that I've kind of heard, but not in as exact and as precise as you put it, and such a great argument. And it's interesting to me that now we have these synthetic drugs coming on board, and yet Border Patrol and CBP, for some reason, are always arguing who catches more drugs. That seems to be their biggest goal. But at the same time, what everybody in CBP and Border Patrol knows is that the majority of these drugs, while there are drugs crossing in between the ports of entry, and Border Patrol does apprehend that, it's not at the level that you see of people trying to smuggle at the ports of entry. But then, even then, it's not at the level that you see on these cargo containers that they only check 3.7% of, at least in 2021, that's what they were checking. And they don't want to really invest what it would take to actually stop the drugs from coming across. So if they're not going to invest in that, I can kind of see where then the idea of decriminalizing, and especially the drug user, because it always seems like that's who we're really getting, is the people who are addicted to drugs for a variety of different reasons. And it feels to me too like when I talk to families who've lost members to fentanyl and stuff, they don't understand why it can't be stopped. They don't understand why the government doesn't do more. It's interesting that they're so willing. I always say the word interesting. It's disgusting, actually, how they are blaming it on asylum seekers. And my experience in the Border Patrol is that, like, the only time that actual migrants and asylum seekers actually put drugs on their back, and they usually only carry about 60 to 70 pounds, is what a decent sized man can carry through the mountains or through the deserts or whatever, is that they're being forced to. And it's such a small amount, and typically it's marijuana, and it's used, they'll send them across to hit the sensors, and that does distract the agents. And then the bigger loads that come through the tunnels, or the bigger loads that are going through the ports of entry and then have to get through in between where the checkpoints are, that's used as a distraction and so forth. And it just feels like we're constantly chasing our tail in law enforcement. And you celebrate after it and you're, oh, yeah, we stopped drugs from getting in. But did you really stop any drugs from getting in? And I guess people are making a lot of money off of it. It does not seem like, I tell people all the time, politicians do not seem to want to solve this. There are ways to solve it, and they just don't want to solve it. Is that how you feel about this? Is that what you
Yeah,
found?
yeah. So solve is a word I might not go so far as to say solve, but manage.
Manage.
I
Okay.
think that the kinds of things that we're seeing now in terms of cartel behavior, I think fit into a pattern of drug war theater that has been going on for a long, long time now. I'm
Mm-hmm.
reminded of a scene from a great film that came about 20 years ago called Maria Full of Grace. It's about a Colombian drug mule, so to speak, and she's a poor young woman who finds herself pregnant, works in a flour factory in Bogota, and becomes a drug mule by swallowing condoms full
Mm-hmm.
of heroin and flying to New York. And that movie, and I worked with the director a little bit on it, and it shows very well that one of the common tactics they use is to put maybe a dozen people on that flight from Bogota to New York who are smuggling drugs. Two of them will actually fit the profile of a drug
Mm-hmm.
courier, right? And the other 10 don't fit the profile, and those two serve as the distraction that keeps the officers tied up, and the other 10 just walk right through. So I wonder to what extent that's happening along our borders in some of this drug war theater, and to what extent are they using other smuggling modalities as distractions? Yes, there's a lot coming through ports of entry. But there's also what Donald Rumsfeld called the problem of known unknowns, right? We don't know where the vast majority of this dark matter, this missing mass, as astrophysicists would put it, where that's getting through. So we know what we're
Mm-hmm.
capturing. A lot of those are ports of entry, a tiny bit on the backs of migrants.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, we're not so much talking about the narco tunnels, hundreds of which have been discovered since the 90s. And those have rail systems, electricity, drainage, everything, and they can move 24/7 once they're open,
Mm-hmm.
in theory. And you've got drones now that can, some of these heavy lift drones can lift hundreds of pounds over hundreds of miles. As we're seeing this in Ukraine, the technology is evolving very, very, very rapidly in wartime. I was reading a testimony of Gloria Chavez, the CPB's Rio Grande Valley sector chief, told Congress in February 2023 that her sector had over, quote, 10,000 drone incursions and 25,000 at the border drone detections over a 1 year period. That's a staggering number to me. And a lot of those, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure, for intelligence purposes to see where the patrols are, et cetera. And I wonder how many of them are actually moving cargo. Because once again, with fentanyl, it's so compact that it's in many ways impossible to stop,
Mm-hmm.
because we've
Mm-hmm.
created this incredibly compact drug. Originally, the fentanyl would come through the postal service, small packets, right? And you would go on the dark web and buy from a supplier in China, and they would say, "Oh, we're going to ship you a iPhone case for your phone. Inside will be a couple of silica gel packs to keep out the moisture. The
Mm-hmm.
gel pack with the one with the red dot, that's the one that has the fentanyl in it.
Mm.
Don't open that one. Be careful with that one." And then they
Don't
began
eat
moving
it.
production. Yeah, exactly. And then they began moving production into Canada, and now it's in Mexico. So we keep chasing this commodity around, but it's so compact that you basically need a room the size of my living room to produce this stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to find this needle in a haystack the size of, well, Mexico. And so for many, I've been in this field for 25 years, and most of that time a lot of that time I spent working with peasant farmers in different countries like Colombia and other places. Why are they doing what they're doing? How do they grow these things? How do they move the product, et cetera? With synthetic drugs and fentanyl in this new era of drugs, you don't need farmers. You don't need farm. You don't need
Mm-mm.
land mass. It's very easy to escape detection. So we're
Mm-hmm.
moving into one of the scariest periods in the drug war and in my years of working on this issue. We've made this economy far more dangerous, far more rapidly than we needed to. And another way of doing this is that we've been thinning out the herd. We've been using this blanket law enforcement big stick for so many decades now that the people we capture when we set out to apprehend these people tend to be the people who were clumsy enough, awkward enough, dumb enough, poor enough to get caught, right?
Yeah.
So that the people we miss by definition tend to be the people who are the most innovative, the most cunning, the most adaptable, not necessarily the most violent, because violence does not is not a great formula for longevity in this field, but the ones who keep their
Right.
head down, who prefer bribes over bullets, who prefer using technology over brute force. Those are the ones we keep missing, and so we've been causing this drug economy to evolve at a Darwinian in a Darwinian fashion at an incredibly rapid rate, right? If we could
Mm.
incentivize other sectors of the economy, the new green energy, et cetera, along these lines, we'd be far better off as a species. But this we're incentivizing the wrong sector to innovate, and so you can't hope to win a war on drugs when your policies ensure that only the most efficient operations survive.
Mm-hmm.
But not only do they survive, they thrive because we've done two things indirectly to help them. Number one, we tried to cut off the supply of drugs in the street to constrict that supply while the demand remains constant or even expands, thereby driving up prices and profits. And we've eliminated the competition for them. We've picked off the inefficient, the clumsy traffickers, and we left that open this incredibly lucrative space to super traffickers. We've been selectively breeding super traffickers, if you will. It's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like how public health professionals say you shouldn't use antibiotics for everything. We overuse it, and so that we get drug-resistant strains of bacteria. Well, we're getting that also in the drug war. We're getting law enforcement resistant strains of traffickers who are much more adaptable and they stay one step ahead of the law. And we keep incentivizing that to the tune of billions and billions of dollars every year.
It feels a lot like our war on asylum seekers too, quite honestly. I mean, when I was an agent, I think, oh, most people crossing back then were Mexican, and it was about $700 to get across, in the Campo area in the mountains, and that's with a guide. And now it's, I mean, couple thousand, probably 10, 15,000 if you're from Central America and then on up. And everything that we do in immigration enforcement, in as far as entry without inspection and the deterrence policies, none of that's worked. Even sending them out to their deaths intentionally to kill them and so forth has not worked. And all it's done is incentivize, as you say, the cartel. I mean, cartel wasn't even involved with human smuggling at that level back in the 90s. Now they are, because we've made it so profitable for them. And we just keep adding more and more border patrol. Every time a politician says we're going to fix the problem with asylum seekers crossing illegally with more border patrol, I'm like, that just doesn't make any sense. And like you say, you're just hammering every nail you can. And the border patrol is a law enforcement tool, and asylum's a humanitarian need. They don't have any other plans other than this, though, right? Just keep hammering away with border patrol and all this other stuff, and keep claiming that
Yeah,
now they say they have a holistic approach to catching the methamphetamine and ketamine and all this other stuff coming through, but it seems pretty much like the same thing they've always been doing.
yeah, and it's incentivized that way. In the Pentagon system, they would call this the iron rice bowl, right? That you would feed forever on this. You would never run out
Mm.
because there would always be a problem. There will always be drugs. There will always be migrants to some level. And the
Mm-hmm.
more or less that you hype it means you get your budget every year. And so the metrics they focus on tend to be the ones that guarantee more funding for the next year. So they say, look how many kilos we've interdicted. Look how many kingpins, traffickers we've arrested. Look at these kinds of metrics, rather than have you reduced the amount of drugs coming into the United States? Have you reduced the number of overdose deaths? It's kilos, it's prisoners, it's convictions, etc. And I would argue that those are indicators that don't really help us understand this problem, or whether any progress is being made in terms of actually keeping people safe. Um, and so, yes, it's the iron rice bowls. It's all geared toward budgets, as are most things in Washington, quite frankly.
So when you say the drug war theater, it's so you're talking about how all these drug dealers find ways constantly to outsmart CBP, to outsmart Border Patrol, to outsmart the police, and so forth. And like you said, the drug tunnels were going on I mean, they've probably been going on longer than we've known about, but I know they started getting really big in the 90s, and right before I left the main drug area, they found a tunnel just right after I left that I had been searching for a couple of months. And and in the same way, I thought back to the year prior when I was on a drug narcotics liaison task force with DEA and some other people out there, and they sent migrants across with drugs on their back, and like you said, they're mules. And I should say also that they're forced to do that. They hold their family members hostage. So typically when you see a migrant with carrying drugs on their back, they're forced to, they intentionally get caught, they intentionally set off the sensors, and then the tunnel's the one that the truck with 1,200 pounds of whatever is going down the road while you're busying yourself with that.
You know, if you looked at the drug war from the 40,000 foot perspective, looking down, it would look absolutely insane because
Mm-hmm.
everyone is doing exactly what's in his or her self-interest. Whether you're a smuggler, whether you're a cartel chief, whether you're a border patrol agent, whether you're a politician, the incentive mechanisms are all there. Um, and very often you have bureaucrats on the government side working against each other, but the
Mm-hmm.
budgetary incentives are there for them to keep doing what they're doing. And so there are myriad reasons why the various actors in this world do what they do. But self-interest is a big part of it. And perversely, it's the policies of prohibition that reinforce the mechanisms that keep this ball rolling. So that we have basically we are we have been giving an unintended or indirect price support to drug traffickers for decades now, for more than a century. When we're talking about things like marijuana, methamphetamine, fentanyl, heroin, these are minimally processed agricultural and chemical commodities that cost pennies per dose to manufacture. There's nothing magical about these substances. Some of them are quite easy to produce, others take a little bit more skill, but the raw materials aren't that expensive. The only
Mm-hmm.
drug that really ought to be expensive, perhaps, maybe peyote, because the cactus takes so long to grow. It's endangered, and therefore, you shouldn't use natural peyote, except if you're indigenous. They have permission to do that. But for all other drugs, these things are minimally processed agricultural and chemical commodities for which we give a risk premium so that as the product moves from the field where the farmer historically has produced it to where it gets trafficked to the bigger cities and then eventually crossing the border into the US, each time it crosses a more heavily policed border or checkpoint,
Mm-hmm.
it snowballs in value, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the sense that from a smuggler's perspective, um, if I'm going to face escalated chances of going to prison or getting shot or getting apprehended, then I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
charge you more for that smuggling. If you can find someone else to do it for last year's rate, go ahead. But this is what I'm charging
Mm-hmm.
this year because things are getting really hairy. And the tougher the border, the higher the risk premium, so that
Mm-hmm.
you can, make something 10 times more valuable by moving it a few hundred meters across a heavily policed border, like the
Mm-hmm.
US border, for instance. So we have, for generations now, been giving this price support to drug traffickers. And we wonder why we can't make this stuff disappear. You'll never make it disappear by making it astronomically more valuable to get into this economy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what prohibition does. And we learned that with alcohol, right? The moment we regulated alcohol, there was no more, Al Capone and his buddies were no longer shooting each other with machine guns. We had a regulated alcohol market
Mm-hmm.
instead of illicit market.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to when the Border Patrol started in 1924. That was also during the alcohol prohibition, and that's what the original agents that are on the officer down page were all shot in gin run, or tequila runs across the border trying to get it in, and that was their big claim to fame back then, is trying to stop that, which most of them were just bought off and they sold it, and everybody was drinking down there anyhow. So I mean, come on, give it a rest. But it's also, I think, confusing to people too when they read stories like recently they had one of the CBP doctors was on a helicopter going to help guard some UN meeting with BORTAC agents, so Border Patrol SWAT team, BORTAC agents, and he had requested fentanyl lollipops laced with fentanyl, just in case, any of the Border Patrol agents got shot and he needed to give them a quick dose of pain relief. I was like, what? I don't know how fentanyl works and how fast it works if you stick a lollipop with fentanyl on it. But it kind of at the same time seems like, number one, they're not really trying to stop it. And number two, the people that claim to be trying to stop it are sometimes using it. And so I think it gets conflicting for a lot of people out there to hear one minute if you're around a little tiny bit of fentanyl you'll die, because you see these videos of cops just passing out and saying that they have been infected by this fentanyl and stuff. What's good advice that you think you could give to parents right now who are concerned about their teenagers who might be interested in experimenting with drugs like many of us do? What do you tell people like that, where one minute they're seeing, you're instantly going to die, and then the next minute you're seeing law enforcement officials use it in everyday exercises?
Yeah, this is far too serious an issue um, to keep going on the same way we've been going on with scare tactics and
Mm-hmm.
propaganda, basically. So this
Mm-hmm.
idea that that the police officers get dizzy and need Narcan because they were in the same room as fentanyl is absolute. It's horseshit. It does not happen. You actually have to make an effort to get the fentanyl inside of you before it can have any effect. So skin contact is not happening. It does not happen. In fact, when the pharmaceutical companies, and fentanyl is an important pharmaceutical drug used in every
Mm-hmm.
hospital, and I've had it in surgeries administered by an anesthesiologist, of course. It's when they try to turn it into a skin patch, for instance. If you listen to the propaganda, oh, it just touches your skin and you're going to overdose. In fact, it doesn't. It takes a lot to cross that barrier of the skin to produce an
Mm-hmm.
analgesic effect. So here's an interesting, fun little fact. The former president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, he took
Mm-hmm.
power in 2016, reigned for 5 years, carried out a absolutely brutal drug war, killed up to 30,000 people, mostly poor, suspected drug users, extrajudicial killings. He himself, in 2016, gave a national press conference where he bragged about using fentanyl. He didn't realize it was the same drug that was causing this problem in North America, right? And he had a
What?
motorcycle accident he had a motorcycle accident a few years ago before he took office, and his doctor had put him on a fentanyl patch, right? He put it in the back of his neck where he was having the pain and stuff, and he talked in this press conference, and you can still watch this online. It's still up there, where he brags about, oh, I love fentanyl. I'm in paradise. You have no idea how great this is. And in fact, I take quadruple the dose my doctor recommended. And of course, his doctor was immediately contacted because this was a national press conference. What's going on? So the doctor cut him off
Yeah.
immediately. But that just goes to show you, that the skin patch, which is designed to pass through the skin barrier, still he did a quadruple dose and had been doing it for a long time. So I wouldn't overreact in that sense. But on the other hand, I grew up in the 80s. Drugs today are not drugs back then. That
Mm-mm.
back then, yeah, it might have been adulterated and stepped on in terms of dilution, but it was generally going to be the drug that was advertised to be, or
Mm-hmm.
something similar. Now we're finding lots of stuff being cut with methamphetamines or fentanyl, one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
In the some of the Mexican pharmacies where American tourists go, for instance, the cartels have made inroads there. Because we have a shortage of Adderall in the United States, thank you, DEA, many people are turning toward Mexican pharmacies as
Mm-hmm.
tourists going down there. And so that has been cut with methamphetamine. Um, and the cartels have gotten very sophisticated. They got the holographic, labels in the packages. It looks exactly like the prescription
Yeah.
drugs. Similarly with opioids, you think you're getting opioids or certain types of opioids in Mexico. and in fact, it's fentanyl laced
Hmm.
drug. It's also being smuggled into the U.S. So pills and powders, you don't know what they are. I think our reaction as a society, if we truly do care about saving lives, if life is the bottom line, as so many politicians pretend it is, then we should be doing things like legalizing fentanyl test strips, which is still illegal in many states, right? The idea that here we have a tool where people can alert themselves whether there's fentanyl in this drug, and we made that illegal, a criminal offense. That's insane to me. We should be having
Wow.
overdose prevention centers, as they have in New York, and throughout the world, actually. So these centers, basically, no one has ever died of an overdose in one of these centers, and there are hundreds around the world. They've been operating for decades uh, under supervision of medical personnel. Whereas you have lots of overdose deaths in the regions around those centers where people don't take advantage of them. That's where people are dying in the streets, not in these
Hmm.
overdose prevention centers. We should be looking at safe supply or safer supply, as they're doing in Canada, where their response to a drug supply that has become utterly toxic. Fentanyl is in everything. It's hard to find heroin anymore. So their response has been to allow physicians to prescribe legal opioids that users can use to produce a similar effect to the street drugs they had
Hmm.
been using. So it's a known dose, pure dose, and much lower likelihood of overdosing from fentanyl. In Switzerland, for instance, they've been doing that for decades with heroin maintenance programs,
Hmm.
where doctors prescribe heroin to people who have a heroin addiction. And so people are
Hmm.
able to get on with their lives, hold down a lot of white collar jobs, a lot of, have relatively normal lives. They're merely dependent on this drug. Um,
And it's a
and
safer drug, is it not? Because I saw another project like in England that did that, where they would inject the pure heroin, obviously pharmaceutical grade, into like lace it into a cigarette. Some people would prefer to smoke it that way. And then they get, they're only allowed like a pack a week or something like that. And that helps maintain them and then their jobs and stuff. So it's a safer drug. It's not like we would think of heroin on the streets, correct?
yeah, in fact, yeah, a known dose is one of the safest things out there.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, pure heroin is safer than impure heroin, as long as you know
Right.
the dose, right? Nobody sets out with the intent, or very few people set out with the intention of overdosing on heroin
Right.
or other opioids. It's because they don't know what the concentration is. And historically, it could be 7% pure heroin or 70% pure heroin. You just don't know what you're putting into your body. And so in the 70s, Dr. John Marks in Liverpool famously pioneered a lot of this heroin maintenance programs in the UK. And because people were on the NHS, National Health Service, they were able to get a pure supply of heroin, which is also used in the NHS. If you break a leg or something like that, you'll get diacetylmorphine heroin
Mm-hmm.
in hospital. And so the idea that, and this doesn't work for everyone. There's an old saying in this field: if you've known one person with addiction, you've known exactly one person with addiction, because everyone has a different path and different, histories that lead
Mm-hmm.
them to doing what they're doing. But there was a composite story of a young woman, let's say, in her 20s, goes in to see Dr. Marks in Liverpool and says, uh, I got this heroin addiction. And the doctor says, yes, I see what your problem is. You're addicted to heroin. Um, People think of heroin users as being lethargic and drugged out. And in fact, they're some of the
Mm-hmm.
most uh, focused people you'll ever meet. Problem
Really?
is, they apply their energy to only one thing in our system, right? Which is, where's my next fix going to come from? And so it occupies so much mental space that the things you think about are, where am I going to get the next dose? Is the dealer going to be there? Is the stuff going to be any good? Do I have enough money? Do I need to turn some tricks? Do I need to steal something? If I steal something, where do I fence it? And then, they go to the
Mm-hmm.
dealer,
Mm-hmm.
they get their fix, and they're back on that treadmill again. And what Dr. Marks and other physicians have found is that you can truncate this process, and say, okay, your problem is you're addicted to heroin. I'm going to write you a script, a prescription for heroin. You can go down to the chemist, the drugstore in the UK, and it's on the NHS, so it's free. Give them this
Hmm.
prescription, and you will never have to worry about where your next fix is going to come from. This is a maintenance dose. You can't. I'm not going to give you more and more so you can chase the dragon or sell or whatever. But this is for
Right.
you, and you don't have to panic anymore. And that, for in this woman's case, freed up a lot of mental space. Not going to happen for everyone, but in this
Right.
particular case, it's insightful to see the mental process that goes on. Oh, I don't have to think about this anymore in terms of where my next dose is going to come from. And that gave her more time to think about her life. I've got a 4-year-old son, I got a 3-year-old daughter. Where have I been for their lives? I used to have a life. This chemical ball and chain, it doesn't get me that high anymore. It just keeps me from going to withdrawal. And, doctor, I'm ready to give this stuff up now because they're under the NHS. The doctor can immediately route her into a treatment program.
Hmm.
And so the ability to just to think about your life in different ways, different
Hmm.
possibilities open up when you take that anxiety away from people. It frees up a lot of mental space. So that's one way to look at this problem, and of course lots of people use for different reasons, but that's one enlightening way to look at this problem, rather than, oh, you need to just behave and stop using, as though that's going to happen somehow. There's a lot of, some people bring it through, brought to this through trauma. There's a big correlation with childhood sexual abuse and addiction in later life. There's lots of different reasons and pathways to this problem. So I don't want to overgeneralize.
I see a lot in the work that I do with people who are driving load vehicles of migrants being smuggled, especially in Arizona and the Tucson sector. A lot of the people who are being arrested smuggling migrants in cars, they're almost always American, and they drive like you wouldn't believe because they're high on fentanyl. And the reason why, like in several interviews, I find that the drivers had, like, maybe a couple of years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, they had a major accident or whatever happened in their lives and they had to get on opiates. A legitimate need for pain relief. And then, we realized that this is heavily addictive. It's not good for them. It just this and that. And so then the doctors start cutting it down and she couldn't get it anymore. Ended up in a divorce, ended up losing her children, ended up somehow down in Tucson. Somebody said, let's smuggle, I'll give you some fentanyl. And so fentanyl ends up replacing the opiate that they need. And then they end up having to go and smuggle human beings to get a quick $1,000 to be able to be able to get their fix. Is so is fentanyl as highly addictive as the opiates are?
Opioids tend to be very addictive. Yeah, or it can
And
cause.
fentanyl is just a synthetic opiate,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So it doesn't need a plant. No farmers involved. Just chemists. But that again shows the short-sighted solutions from the DEA and other drug warriors. We had
Mhm.
a problem in the 90s where doctors overprescribed, and we know the OxyContin story with the Sacklers, etc.,
Mhm.
incentivizing doctors to keep prescribing. The DEA says, "Oh, this is becoming a problem," and in their infinite wisdom, shuts down the pill mills. When you have people who are clearly dependent or addicted to these drugs, and what are they going to do? And suddenly, heroin took over that market. A dose of heroin became as cheap in New England as a six-pack of beer,
Hmm.
and then they started, cracking down on the heroin, which then popularized the substitute, fentanyl. And now we've created a problem that is infinitely worse than the one we began with. Um, and we never seem to learn that lesson. Um,
It seems like we should be helping these people. Like, we've created this problem, you know, in part. Obviously, they became injured or something like this, and then we create this problem, and then these synthetics come in, and we just keep criminalizing and criminalizing them. When it's kind of the same. Like I said, it's similar to what we're doing with immigration and asylum and stuff. You had said when I asked you if you wanted to be on the show that you wanted to ask me questions about the Border Patrol. What do you want to ask me?
yes, I would love to pick your brain about tunnels, drones, different ways that drugs are smuggled, and um, what are we not talking about, right? In terms of the discourse today, we're talking about ports of entry, we're talking about migrants, we're not talking about tunnels for the most part, and we're
Mhm.
certainly not talking about drones. Um,
And we're not
and
talking about how many CBP and Border Patrol officers are
yes,
bright.
yes, and
At
also,
my
I'm not going
checkpoint, you could get the drugs through if you just showed your tits. If
to.
you showed your tits, you were way through. That's what the I was sitting in a deposition with a US attorney when a smuggler told me that, and I was like, "Huh, my checkpoint, really? Okay."
Wow. Well, I'm out of luck now.
Well, you never know. You never know.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm curious. How big are some of these tunnels? I mean, do they people talk about them within CPB and
Yeah, yeah, they have a whole tunnel crew that in the Border Patrol that only works in trying to detect the tunnels. And in San Diego, at least, when you're down in San Diego proper, so the cities that are down on the border in the San Diego County are like San Isidro, Chula Vista, National City is a little bit north, but at any rate, those areas would have tunnels, and there's a lot of industry down there. And so they would go right to one of the warehouses and pop up in a bathroom in one of the warehouses. And so you have all your regular business that's being done. They're big enough that you can walk through. Some of them, like you said, have railways, they have lighting systems, they have food, they have water, I mean, they can be really intricate, and they can really be just big enough that maybe somebody who's 5'2" or 5'3" can hunch down and push drugs through. The one over in Campo was just kind of very rudimentary, but they were able to get relatively quickly about 1,200, 1,500 pounds of weed or whatever drug they wanted into a truck really quickly. And it's always it seemed to be very close to where the backpacks were coming across. So it's right in that vicinity at the same time because they're trying to distract you from that. At the same time, at my station, the way that that was getting through was because the boss of my station, the actual, so like he would be like considered the chief of a station. It's called a patrol agent in charge. He actually lived in the same area. And he was taking money and closing down our checkpoint on Interstate 8 or not allowing us to be on the roads that circumvent the checkpoint, the smaller two-lane road called Old Highway 80. And he would not allow us to go down the dirt roads on the East and West Indian because that's where they were going north. And then he used scouts that lived along the houses to tell if any of us were around. And he made us only go down the paved road called Tierra del Sol, or TDS for short, because they could see us on that road as we're coming down to the border. And so, and then he's also the one who assigned all the agents who would be his canine agents. So, I mean, and then, one of a couple of our canine agents actually ended up getting fired because they became addicted to the drugs. The interesting thing about the canine agents too is that Border Patrol, at least back then, I'm not sure how they do it now, they do their own test, at least at Campo Station. And so they never fail their dogs because if they ever fail their dog and then they go to court and they say, oh, he missed this one drug, so that you will never see the drug dogs fail anything. They always pass everything. Um, but yeah, the tunnels actually are one of the best ways to get it crossed. Now that I know that drones can carry a couple 100 pounds, that's a pretty easy way to do it. They pay for themselves. I've also seen them, the big semi trucks that hold cars, multiple cars that are coming to the dealership.
Mhm.
I've seen something similar to that where they have these tracks and you just go up, it goes on top of the fence, and then it turns and it just goes right over the side. It's like, what? When I first saw that. But when I was first out there, it was just we didn't even have a fence. They would just unhook the barbed wire fence and drive right on through. And so it was pretty easy back in the day.
I remember seeing photos from one tunnel bust in I think 2011 near San Diego, where the tunnel was incredibly sophisticated cinder block walls, beautiful rail system, etc. And I think there was something like 40 tons of marijuana on the Mexican side ready to go through that tunnel. And we're thinking about drugs like fentanyl, like methamphetamine, which are very compact, especially fentanyl. Even 1 ton, even 1 kilo is a huge deal. And then I think about the wall, Trump's big, beautiful wall, the Bollard Wall, right? So it's got, it can't be a solid wall in the desert. Border Patrol wants to see what's on the other side. You got to let sand dunes, sand to pass through. Wildlife has to be able to pass through, otherwise you get dunes, etc. And so there are these 4-inch gaps. There's lots of photos of Trump at the wall, standing behind this wall that has 4-inch gaps. If I'm a drug trafficker, my first countermeasure is going to be, okay, we're going to switch our drug packaging to something that's 3.5 inches wide, a shirt box, a donut box, whatever, a pie box, a size, and literally hand unlimited amounts of fentanyl through that wall. Is there anything to stop that? I mean, because it's the wall's so long and you've only got so many agents, so many eyes.
And there's so many breaks. And even if it was solid, I mean, when we did have the solid Vietnam planks, the steel, what do they call it? Panels that they used in Vietnam for helicopters to land on. That was the first wall under the Clinton administration, at least through Operation Gatekeeper. And all you got to do is just dig a little hole. It doesn't take but a few minutes. You can just go buy a $25 grinder at Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever. And you can do that with the bollards too. So, I mean, if they can cut those down and get big, giant Ford Expeditions through, which they can, and I've seen them do it in El Centro a couple of years ago, then, I mean, the sky's the limit, quite literally. I mean, what makes the news is like the idea of people swallowing the baggies or this kind of stuff. And it does happen. It's not to say that it doesn't happen, but that's not the easiest way to get the drugs in.
I mean, I've seen so many countermeasures to the basic wall technology that it's almost laughable. I've seen catapults, Roman era technology, to literally fling it over giant bales over the wall. I've seen catapults literally fastened onto the wall itself. So you have a rope, you pull down on the lever and you put your drugs there and it flings it right over for you. I've seen photos of the t-shirt cannons you see in sports stadiums when they blast the t-shirts out. Giant ones, pneumatic air-powered cannons that can blow giant bales of drugs over the wall. So there are so many different technologies and countermeasures. The Trump, I think, when he launched his re-election campaign last year, he talked about 2 big innovations he was going to promote. One was the new modern cities, ultra modern cities going to build. And then the other thing would be flying cars. Flying cars. Well, yes, there are reality in places in China and Dubai and other places. They're being tested there. But they're basically glorified big drones that are on autopilot. And I think traffickers have always been, the early adopters of these technologies. And they're keeping an eye on this stuff. And I suspect, you're going to someday see early adoption of flying cars along the border area where you literally just hop back and forth, back and forth, back and forth like a shuttle over that stupid wall, over the wall, under the radar, that sort of thing. And so it's ironic that Trump's 2016 campaign was build a wall, and his 2024 campaign is flying cars, which will make the wall useless.
I remember when he was talking about wanting to build his wall, and I think he only built 15 miles of actual new wall. Down here in San Diego, we have 3 walls back to back in San Ysidro. It's ridiculous. But I think that the thing that I found most hilarious was he kept saying that the old solid wall that we had, he said, agents, they could get hit in the head with big bags of marijuana and drugs and it could kill them. I was like, what are you talking about? Nobody throws bags of marijuana at Border Patrol agents. They throw rocks or shit. I mean, why don't you just put a whole bag full of money and throw it at me? Oh, please don't throw it at me. It's the
big
dumbest
bag of
thing
coins.
I've ever
That could be
heard.
dangerous.
It can be dangerous if it's a bag full of coins. I will say that. But I was just like, that is just the most ridiculous thing. the thing is they have nothing to do but think about ways to get it in. And aside from bribing officials to let you go through or to wave you through the checkpoints, which they do all the time, I mean, I think I still maintain the easiest way to get the drugs into the country is the cargo containers that are either coming through on the chemicals are coming through on the ships, probably some drugs, heroin, opium, maybe that kind of stuff, though I don't know how popular that is. But the cargo containers that just aren't inspected and already have permits and have paid to come through without inspection. And it comes through also, I know in the El Paso area, there's rail cars that go back and forth delivering goods and stuff. And the US government doesn't want to slow that down because that's capitalism. We don't want to slow the economy down. That's just the absolute easiest way to get it in. And then everything else is just icing. I mean, there's just so many different levels of drug dealing. Like there's so many different levels of migrant smuggling of everything. So you have your little mom and pop groups out here in the mountains, doing smaller amounts. You have people looking as lookouts. You have people who will take money where you have actual smugglers come across with it on their backs and then drop it in a certain area, and then somebody else knows to come and pick it up from that area. So sometimes you'll find empty, or you'll find bags of drugs and nobody could get to pick it up because maybe a border patrol agent happened to be sitting right by where the pickup was.
Yeah.
And so then it's found like a year later all nasty and stuff. But any possible way that they could think to bring it in, they will. And the agents are a really good way to bring it in, simply because when you graduate your probationary period in the border patrol, I know it still happens, maybe not as much as in the 90s, but what happens is the managers of your station, so the supervisors of your station, take a collection and they take all the men down to Tijuana or whatever your Mexican city is south of you, and they treat you to all the women, so all the hookers and drugs and alcohol you want. And if you know anything about brothels in Mexico, then you know they're run by cartel. And so, and so that starts the corruption. And so then they have something to say, well, I know you were down doing blow, I know you were down doing whatever, and you're down here every weekend. And so they maintain detailed packets on the individual agents that are going down there and doing things that they're not supposed to be doing. And that's one way to get it started. So
Like they say, prohibition is an equal opportunity corrupter. Although some people are much better situated to really cash in on that corruption than others. I'm
yeah,
reminded of episode 1 of the series on HBO, Boardwalk Empire, which takes place
I love
during
that
the
show.
birth of
Love that
Prohibition,
show.
right? And of course, the first people to celebrate the imposition of Prohibition, who saw what was going to happen, were the criminals, who got
Yeah.
great new racket just opened up. The mayor drinks, the chief of police drinks, everybody drinks. And
Mm-hmm.
it built so much cynicism toward the law, toward law enforcement, and it was a sham. Um, uh, it was the best era these criminals ever had, right, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
money making. But also, I think we need to remind people that we now live in an era of globalization, and moving commerce across borders is the name of the game. It's what politicians
Yep.
aim for, frictionless, as possible. At the same time, we're trying to do something completely counter to that, which is to inspect
Mm-hmm.
everything. If you look at, for instance, the smuggling of cocaine around the world, the banana economy is a good thing to look at, right? Because bananas come from certain parts of the world, particularly South America, Ecuador, for instance, Guatemala, and you have this global infrastructure where you can go into a supermarket in any part of the world basically and find bananas, sometimes more expensive than others, but you can find bananas. That's a
Mm-hmm.
highly perishable crop. We got to figure out how to move it from those jungles into supermarkets. And cocaine is very easy to tag along for the ride because you can't hold up these shipments for long. They'll rot. So everything's designed to move quickly, and with a minimal amount of fuss, because money is the bottom line for legitimate banana commerce. And so traffickers tag along. Also, the technology that develops parallel to that. We see all kinds of innovations in the maritime smuggling front. from in the old days, it would be maybe a shrimp boat or a fishing boat. Maybe they'll put some drugs under the ice where the fish is kept, etc. They've gotten much more sophisticated. They went from that to cigarette boats, speed boats,
Mm-hmm.
super fast boats. We got better at interdicting those. They switched to semi-submersibles, not
Mm-hmm.
proper submarines, but they're fiberglass. They're very big. They can carry 6 to 12 tons of drugs sometimes, and they stay 90% below water. So all you see is the conning tower. And we got better at detecting those even. And so
Mm-hmm.
then they switched to fully submersible, proper submarines. Cartels build their own submarines from scratch now.
Mm-hmm.
And those are very hard to detect. And they're even better are the so-called narco torpedoes or drug sleds. Some of them would be literally bolted onto the underside of freighters, and so they
Mm-hmm.
would dock in the port, and people would inspect the hold, and they inspect the above the ship. Unless you're going to send divers to take time to investigate down below, you may not see this. And ports are expensive, right? No one can afford to berth their ship for long. You've got to keep moving this product and turn over and turn over. And so there's those kinds of narco torpedoes. And then there are the ones that are towed behind vessels with a long cable. If you're stopped at sea, they release the cable. The torpedo then floats away, and it's got instructions to rise every few hours and submit and emit an encrypted signal to let the follow-on boat know this is where the cargo is. Pick it up now. And so all these levels of innovation make this depressing to think that it shows the folly of winning the war on drugs, that we keep
Mm-hmm.
incentivizing more diabolical, more ingenious ways to move this commodity. And now that drugs are getting more and more potent and compact, I think it's a losing proposition that you could
Yeah.
ever try to control this at this point.
Yeah. It sounds like we're not addressing any of the issues. Do we have any drug programs that are targeted to kids these days? I know Border Patrol and all these cops. It seems like the drug programs are to send the cops, the people arresting the small time drug dealers,
Yeah.
into the schools to tell the kids not to do drugs. That's pretty much what we're doing, what we've been
The,
doing, right? Since the 80s.
this so-called DARE model, which was just an absolute joke, and it backfired. Studies have shown that there were higher rates of drug use amongst vulnerable populations of those who went through the DARE program versus those who didn't go through DARE. It breeds cynicism, where they invite officer friendly or not so friendly into the classroom and say, kids, if you smoke a joint, you'll be shooting heroin in 6 months. And a lot of
Yeah.
kids in older cohorts not go through that, and they think, what other lies are the grown-ups telling me? And they
Yeah.
throw the
Yeah.
baby out with the bathwater, because there are some serious drugs out there. We need serious education. And so that spawned a group that basically turned around Y2K, formed, called Students for Sensible Drug Policy. I was on the early board of directors of that organization, and it became one of the fastest growing student organizations on campuses nationwide and now globally. So there are chapters all over the world now, and it was started by kids who were the targets of the DARE program, the original DARE generation, and they were saying, look, DARE program not only backfired, it put my generation at more risk. And we need to have more honest policies to talk about drugs and to implement harm reduction, and to deal with this in a much more serious manner. And so I'm very proud to have been part of that. And so now we have groups like Students for Sensible Drug Policy, groups like Dance Safe, which go
Mm-hmm.
to raves and music festivals to help people test their drugs, to provide harm reduction services and education, meeting people where they're at, not where we insist they ought to be, because that's never worked. And so that's the basis of popular education, is you meet people where they're at, rather than sending officer friendly to go
Yeah.
try to scare them. Um,
Yeah.
and so the Harm Reduction Coalition, lots of great groups out there,
Okay.
really trying to reach people and help people. There's an old African proverb: the last one to recognize the existence of water is the fish, because the fish is swimming in it. We are swimming
Mm.
in a world, a modern globalized world of drugs that we
Mm-hmm.
don't really appreciate how we got here. You and I, we live in the Western Hemisphere. We
Mm-hmm.
migrated, right? And the reason I was asked once to give a talk at a high school in Boulder, where the students would look over your resume and what you've done and give you the title talk, and you would have to speak to that talk, the title they
Uh-huh.
assigned. They looked at my resume and they said, "We want you to talk about sex, drugs, and international relations." And I thought, "Oh Lord, how am I going to tie those three things together?" And it dawned on me at the last minute the story of Columbus, right? What was Columbus after when he set off to possibly sail off the edge of the world? He was after spices, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
gold, not God, but spices. Those the other benefits came along, but spices. Why was he so interested in spices? Why were spices so valuable back then? It wasn't just because the food in Europe was boring at the time, which it was, but each new exotic spice was thought to have all kinds of wonderful properties. And in particular, for men, they were aphrodisiacs. It was the Viagra of the day. And most aphrodisiacs, of course, work in the brain. They don't really work. If you believe it works, then it works. And so, whether it was nutmeg or cinnamon or any of these exotic
Mm.
cloves, they thought, oh, this will put lead in your pencil. And so I argued that half the world got colonized because a bunch of old white men in Europe couldn't get it up. So there you have sex, drugs, and international relations. But okay, that's a little facetious there. But there's a lot of truth to that, though. When
Mm-hmm.
you think
Mm-hmm.
about the economies in the Western Hemisphere for the first 400 years after colonization, we're rooted in very much drug production, but we
Yeah.
don't think of these things
Sugar.
as drugs.
Sugar was a big deal, and sugar's a
Exactly.
drug. Yeah.
Sugar, where we get molasses and rum from. Sugar itself is a drug, in my opinion. But at the time of the American Revolution, the island of Barbados was worth more to the British Empire than the 13 colonies in the United States
Mm.
because of sugar plantations,
Mm-hmm.
right? We think about the original plantations of coffee, tea, spices, sugar, you know, tobacco. These are the commodities that were the backbone in many cases of the Western colonies in the Western
Mm-hmm.
Hemisphere. It drove our development as a hemisphere. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, we're soaking in drugs. We have been all along. We just don't. We just move the
We
scale of
just don't
what we
act
could
like it.
illicit and which ones we like. Right?
Yeah.
We were born
Oh.
in drugs. We were born. The American Revolution and the French Revolution were, in some ways, um, born in coffee houses. And when coffee was first introduced to Europe, many rulers thought it was poisonous and dangerous and subversive, and so they banned in some countries coffee drinking, including death penalty. Rarely carried out, but the threat was there.
Hmm.
And some of these monarchs were right. Coffee was problematic because before that, people drank at night, right? They go to the ale house and would drink. And when you started boiling water for coffee, for tea, number one, it improves health outcomes because you boil the water. Secondly, you're not getting drunk every night. Sometimes you're getting quite animated and energized and started asking questions and having political discussions. And
Mm-hmm.
so you could argue that in many ways, the French Revolution and the American Revolution were born in coffee houses where people got
Hmm.
together to debate, conspire, and plot. So
There
we're
you
soaking in
go.
drugs, right? Imagine the development of the U.S. economy if there had been no tobacco. What would Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky, what would they look like today? We always have been awash in drugs, and we need to find ways to deal with them rationally rather than
Mm-hmm.
the way we're doing it now, which is to say the ones that we use, we're not going to talk about. But the ones other people, those cultures use, those are drugs. Alcohol and tobacco are by far the biggest killers in our society in terms of illicit substances, drugs.
I'll tell you one thing. I don't know if you know this. I'll tell you one secret. They don't, aside from when you're tested to come into the Border Patrol, you're not really tested for drugs after that. It's supposed to be all random, but they only test you when you become a pain in the ass and a whistleblower. That's the only time I ever got tested 6 years, and I know
Wow.
agents that are on drugs constantly, especially
Wow.
steroids. Vortec boys, they're all steroids. And there's a lot of agents on drugs. They could probably get rid of a very significant chunk of agents if they just did a drug test tomorrow. It's insane. So yeah, I was
Well,
surprised when I resigned in protest, and then the guys would come over, and they wouldn't tell me this when I was an agent because I was a goody two shoes, and I would not tolerate that shit. And I remember one of the guys came over, and he had a big old, what I would call like a, um, I don't know, quarter bag of pot back in the day in the 80s, but it was more than that. And I'm like, where did you get this? And he goes, well, we just get a checkpoint. We take it from people. And I'm like, what? And and I said, is it worth losing your job? Because the guy who's doing this is like, doesn't have much of an education, doesn't it? I mean, this is the best job he's going to get, right? And he's like, no, I just take golden seal if they ever test me. And he says, but they're not going to test me. They only test pain in the asses like you. And then he went, Agent Bud. And then for the first time, we went, oh my God, I'm about to smoke a joint with a current Border Patrol agent, Agent Bud. And my last name is Bud. So that's the big deal. So everybody loved that my last name was Bud. But yeah, I couldn't see going through all that just to smoke a joint and then have to go take a pee test or something and get busted. So, but yeah, they don't test. They don't test.
and the irony of, just one last thing, the irony of testing for marijuana is that it incentivizes people to use synthetic cannabinoids, which are much, much more dangerous and problematic. Whether
Mhm.
it's Spice or K2 or whatever, you get them in the gas station, they're
Yeah.
you know, legal. And the biggest users of this years ago when were military and service academy
Hmm.
cadets. Right, we
Yeah.
invest millions of dollars in West Point and in Air Force Academy and Annapolis, and then because we test them for marijuana, we don't test them for synthetic cannabinoids. We were pushing them up the ladder of harm into using these very sketchy
Hmm.
gas station drugs,
Yep.
and just making the situation far worse, in my opinion.
I would much rather cops be able to get a hold of marijuana and use it on their off time, and then maybe they would relax a little bit more and stop beating the shit out of people. So maybe
Exactly.
that'll work. All right. I want you to definitely come back on, and next time I'm over in your area, I'd
Definitely come
stop
over.
by
I'd
and maybe we
love to
could
have
do
you
some.
give a talk or something. And I learned
Yeah.
from your Twitter feed. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you.
Oh, I learned so much from you too, and I appreciate the work that you do and just really opening my mind up and being able to talk about it from what I learned from you instead of just, anecdotes or whatever. But yeah, I thank you very much for your work.